The first time my daughter ever called me a hero, she was 6 years old. She had scraped her knee falling off her little pink bicycle in front of our tiny house on Maple Street in Boston. She cried so hard she could barely breathe. I picked her up, brushed the dirt off her jeans, kissed her forehead, and told her something my own father used to tell me. Scars don't make you ugly, sweetheart. They remind you that you're stronger than whatever tried to hurt you. She smiled through her tears. You always make everything better, Daddy. That sentence carried me through the hardest years of my life. I remembered those words on the morning of her wedding. I stood in front of the cracked mirror inside my small apartment, carefully adjusting a navy blue suit that was nearly 20 years old. The jacket fit a little tighter than it used to, and the sleeves were slightly short, but it was the nicest thing I owned. I polished my shoes until I could almost see my reflection. Today wasn't about me, it was about Emily, my little girl. The girl who used to sit on my shoulders to watch 4th of July fireworks. The girl who insisted, I read the same bedtime story every night until she memorized every word. The girl whose future had become the reason I woke up every morning after her mother died. I picked up a small velvet box from the kitchen table. Inside wasn't expensive jewelry. It held a silver necklace with a tiny heart pendant. It had belonged to Emily's mother, Sarah. Before cancer took her, she grabbed my hand from her hospital bed. Promise me, she whispered, that Emily will wear this on the happiest day of her life. I had kept that promise safe for 14 years. Today was finally the day. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Dad, please don't get here early. Just come 15 minutes before the ceremony. No heart emoji. No love you. Just instructions. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Then I smiled anyway. She was probably stressed. Every bride was. I slipped the necklace into my inside pocket and headed for the bus stop. The wedding venue overlooked Boston Harbor. White roses lined the entrance. Luxury cars filled the parking lot. Men in designer suits laughed over champagne. Women in elegant dresses posed for photos beneath towering flower arches. I suddenly became very aware of my old suit. A valet glanced at me before asking politely, Delivery entrance is around the back, sir. I smiled. I'm actually here for the wedding. His expression changed instantly. Oh, I'm sorry. It's all right. I had gotten used to people judging me by my clothes years ago. Inside the ballroom, everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, live string quartet. The kind of place I had only ever seen in magazines while sitting in doctors' waiting rooms. I spotted Emily across the room. She looked exactly like her mother. Same smile, same bright blue eyes. For 1 second, my heart felt 20 years younger. I started walking toward her. Then she turned. Our eyes met. Instead of smiling, she froze. A strange panic crossed her face. She hurried toward me before anyone else noticed. Dad? Hey, sweetheart. I opened my arms. She didn't hug me. Instead, she looked around nervously. What are you doing out here? I came a little early. I told you not to. I just wanted to give you something before the ceremony. I reached into my pocket. She gently pushed my hand back down. Later, her voice sounded rushed, almost frightened. Before I could ask why, another woman approached us. Tall, perfect makeup, diamond necklace worth more than my apartment. Victoria Caldwell, Ethan's mother. She smiled at me without warmth. So you're Emily's father? Yes, ma'am. We've heard so much about you. Something about the pause made my stomach tighten. She looked me up and down. Emily, dear, the photographer is waiting. Emily nodded quickly. I'll be right there. Victoria leaned closer to my daughter. Not quietly enough. The guests are arriving. Handle this. Then she walked away. Emily rubbed her forehead. I'm sorry. For what? She looked everywhere except my eyes. Dad, what's wrong? She swallowed. Then she said words that broke something inside me. Could you maybe wait outside until after the ceremony? I blinked. I have a reserved seat. I know. Front row. I know. She bit her lip. It's just... She glanced toward Ethan's wealthy relatives laughing nearby. I don't want any awkward situations. I didn't understand. What awkward situation? You know, no, she whispered. You don't really fit in here. For a moment, the room became completely silent. Not because the music stopped. Not because people stopped talking. Because my heart did. I don't fit? She immediately looked guilty. I didn't mean it like that. Then what did you mean? She sighed. Dad, these people are different. I know. They're executives, judges, politicians. I smiled gently. And? They won't understand. Understand what? She looked at my worn sleeves. My background. No, not my background. Her background. The one she suddenly wanted to erase. I remembered another day. Emily was 16. She needed $500 for a school trip to Washington, D.C. I had exactly $62 in my bank account. So I worked double shifts for 18 straight days. Construction during daylight. Loading delivery trucks all night. I slept 4 hours a day. When I finally handed her the envelope, she hugged me so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. You always save me, Dad. Back then, she had never been ashamed of where the money came from. Back in the ballroom, Emily spoke again. I'm just asking for today. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The expensive makeup. The custom-made wedding dress. The diamond earrings. She looked beautiful. But she also looked like someone carrying the weight of other people's expectations. Emily, I don't want anyone judging you. I smiled sadly. They're not judging me. She didn't answer. They're judging you for having a father like me. A tear appeared in her eye. She didn't deny it. That hurt even more. Before either of us could speak again, Ethan walked over. Tall, confident, perfect tuxedo. He shook my hand politely. Daniel, good to see you. You too, son. He smiled awkwardly, then glanced toward his parents. They're traditional. I almost laughed. Traditional. What a nice word for embarrassed. He cleared his throat. Maybe after the ceremony we can spend more time together. Emily looked relieved he had stepped in. I realized something. Neither of them was protecting me. They were protecting their image. The wedding coordinator approached. 5 minutes. Guests began taking their seats. The music grew louder. Emily suddenly grabbed my hand. Dad? Her voice trembled. I need you to do one thing for me. Anything? She closed her eyes. Please. She could barely finish the sentence. Leave? The word hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. I don't want people asking questions. I stared at my daughter, the little girl who once cried whenever I left for work, now asking me to leave the biggest day of her life. I reached into my pocket one last time. I placed the velvet box into her hands. Your mother's necklace. Emily looked down. Her hands began shaking. I promised she'd wear it today. She opened the box. The tiny silver heart caught the light. Instantly, tears filled her eyes. I'm sorry. I know. I never wanted this. I know. I kissed her forehead exactly the way I had when she was 6 years old. You look just like your mother. She started crying. Real crying. For one brief second, I thought she might change her mind. Instead, she whispered, Please go. I nodded. No anger. No shouting. No scene. Because embarrassing her was the last thing I would ever do. I turned around and quietly walked toward the exit. Not a single guest stopped me. Not a single family member called my name. The ballroom doors slowly closed behind me. Outside, a cold breeze rolled in from Boston Harbor. I sat alone on a wooden bench overlooking the water. I took out my old wallet. Inside was a faded photograph. Sarah, Emily, and me, 30 years ago. Back when we had nothing except each other. I smiled through tears. She'll understand someday, Sarah. I folded the picture carefully and slipped it back into my wallet. Then I stood up and began walking away from the wedding. I didn't know that inside the ballroom. Less than 7 minutes later, the officiant would press play on a surprise video that neither Emily nor the Caldwell family knew existed. And before that video ended, there wouldn't be a single dry eye in the room. Daniel Brooks didn't look back. The sound of the string quartet faded behind him as he walked slowly down the harbor sidewalk, hands buried in the pockets of his old suit. Every step felt heavier than the last. He had survived losing his wife. He had survived sleeping in his pickup truck when money ran out. He had survived 2 back surgeries after 35 years of construction work. But nothing had ever hurt quite like hearing his own daughter say one simple word: leave? Inside the ballroom, nearly 300 guests had taken their seats. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandeliers. The air smelled of white roses and expensive perfume. Emily stood behind the closed doors, clutching her mother's silver necklace in one trembling hand. Her maid of honor, Jessica, frowned. "Emily, what's wrong?" "Nothing." "You've been crying." "I'm just nervous." Jessica had known Emily since college. She knew that wasn't true. "Where's your dad?" Emily froze. "He had to go." Jessica looked confused. "He missed your wedding?" Emily couldn't answer. Instead, she looked down at the necklace. A memory flashed through her mind. She was 12 years old. It was winter. The apartment heater had broken. Snow covered the streets outside. She woke in the middle of the night because she was cold. Her father had wrapped every blanket around her while he slept on the living room floor wearing his old work coat. The next morning, he smiled as if nothing had happened. Only years later did she discover he had spent the heating bill money buying her asthma medication. The memory disappeared as someone knocked on the bridal suite door. "The ceremony starts in 2 minutes. Emily forced herself to smile. "I'm coming." Meanwhile, at the front of the ballroom, Ethan greeted the guests. His father, Richard Caldwell, stood proudly beside him. Richard had spent months making sure this wedding looked perfect. The flowers had cost nearly $50,000. The live orchestra another $30,000. The imported decorations, the designer catering, the ice sculptures. Everything had to reflect the Caldwell family name. As Richard straightened his tie, he quietly asked Ethan, "Everything handled?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes." Richard nodded. "Good. No unnecessary distractions?" "No." Satisfied, Richard smiled toward the guests. Image meant everything to him. He had no idea that within minutes, that carefully crafted image would crumble before hundreds of people. The officiant stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the room fell silent. "Before we begin today's ceremony," a wedding planner hurried toward the stage. She whispered something into the officiant's ear. He looked surprised, then smiled warmly. "Oh, we've just learned there is one final wedding gift." Emily looked confused. "A gift?" The planner nodded. "It arrived this morning. I didn't order anything. It has your mother's name on it." Emily's heart stopped. "My mother?" The planner held up a sealed envelope. "Instructions say—" She unfolded the handwritten letter. "Play this before Emily walks down the aisle." Every guest turned toward the enormous projection screen. Emily whispered, "I've never seen that." Neither had anyone else. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered. Static filled the room. Then, a smiling woman appeared. Sarah Brooks. Alive, healthy, beautiful. She was sitting on the porch of their old house, holding a mug of coffee. The entire ballroom gasped. Emily covered her mouth. Oh my God. It had been 14 years since she'd seen her mother's face moving. Not in photographs. Not in memories. Moving, talking, smiling. Sarah looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," she laughed softly, "then my little girl is getting married." Emily burst into tears before another word was spoken. Sarah smiled. "I wish I could hug you today. I wish I could dance with you. I wish I could tell you how beautiful you look." She wiped away her own tears. "But life doesn't always give us everything we want. So instead, I want to tell you about someone you probably stopped noticing years ago." The camera slowly turned. Standing in the backyard, trying and failing to fix a broken swing, was Daniel, 20 years younger, covered in paint, laughing at himself. The guests chuckled softly. Sarah smiled. "That's your father, the most stubborn man I've ever loved." Another clip played. Daniel making pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse. Emily laughed through tears. She remembered those mornings. Then another. Daniel dancing terribly in the kitchen, while 6-year-old Emily stood on his boots. The room smiled. Then Sarah's expression became serious. There are things children never see. The next clips began. Daniel leaving home every morning before sunrise. Daniel returning after midnight. Daniel eating instant noodles alone in the kitchen after Emily had gone to bed. Daniel secretly sewing holes in his own work gloves instead of buying new ones. Daniel falling asleep sitting upright because he was too exhausted to reach his bed. The ballroom grew quiet. Sarah continued speaking. After doctors told me I was dying, Daniel promised me one thing. He promised our daughter would never feel poor. Emily's breathing became uneven. Sarah looked directly into the camera. He kept that promise, but it cost him everything. The screen changed again. This time, bank statements, hospital bills, mortgage documents, a house sale agreement. Sarah narrated every page. He sold our home, so Emily could stay in the same school district. Another document appeared. Retirement account. Balance. $184,000. Withdrawal. On 100%. He emptied every dollar he had, so our daughter could attend law school without debt. The guests exchanged stunned glances. Even Ethan looked confused. He had never known any of this. Then came the biggest surprise. A short cell phone video. Daniel sitting inside an old pickup truck. Rain hitting the windshield. He didn't know anyone was recording. He whispered to himself, "Just one more year. Emily graduates next spring. I can sleep here. It's okay." Jessica looked at Emily. "What is this?" Emily couldn't breathe. She recognized that truck. She had assumed he simply liked driving it. She never imagined. He had been living in it, Sarah's voice returned. For 8 months. Your father slept in his truck. Because renting an apartment would have meant taking money away from your tuition. Several guests wiped tears from their faces. Richard Caldwell shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The final photo appeared. Daniel standing proudly outside Harvard Law School on graduation day. Emily hugged him in the picture. She was smiling wider than anyone. Sarah whispered, "That smile cost him nearly everything, but he'd do it all again." The room was completely silent. Then Sarah looked directly into the camera one last time. "Emily, if one day you become rich, don't measure people by the suits they wear. Measure them by the sacrifices nobody saw." She smiled gently. "And if your father is still alive, please, never let him wonder whether he was enough." The screen faded to black. One final sentence appeared in white letters. "The richest man in your life may be the one who gave everything away for you." Silence. No music. No applause. Nothing. Then someone in the back of the ballroom began crying. Another guest followed. Within seconds, the room echoed with quiet sobs. Jessica hugged Emily tightly. "Oh my God." Ethan lowered his head, unable to speak. Even Richard Caldwell stared at the floor, ashamed. Emily stood frozen. Her hands still clutched her mother's necklace. Then suddenly, she looked toward the front row. Her father's chair was empty. Reality crashed into her. He hadn't simply missed the wedding. She had sent him away. Emily screamed through tears. "Dad!" She dropped her bouquet onto the marble floor and ran barefoot toward the ballroom doors, ignoring every guest, ignoring the photographers, ignoring the ceremony. She threw open the doors and rushed outside into the cold Boston afternoon. But the sidewalk was empty. Daniel Brooks was already gone. The cold wind off Boston Harbor hit Emily's face the moment she burst through the ballroom doors. "Dad!" Her voice echoed across the waterfront. People standing outside the venue turned to look. There was no answer. Only the distant cry of seagulls and the gentle sound of waves hitting the docks. Emily lifted the hem of her wedding dress and ran, barefoot, ignoring the sharp stones beneath her feet. "Dad!" She searched the parking lot. The garden, the harbor walkway, nothing. It was as if Daniel Brooks had disappeared. Inside the ballroom, no one moved. 300 guests remained seated in complete silence. The luxurious wedding that had been planned for over a year no longer mattered. The expensive flowers, the crystal chandeliers, the orchestra, none of it seemed important anymore. Jessica slowly picked up the bouquet Emily had dropped. She looked at Ethan. You knew? Ethan swallowed hard. I knew Emily asked him to leave. You let it happen? I thought. He couldn't finish the sentence. Jessica's voice shook with anger. You thought what? That he would understand. Richard Caldwell stood and straightened his jacket. This isn't the time for accusations. Jessica turned toward him. No? He was humiliated because your family cared more about appearances than gratitude. Richard's face hardened. We simply wanted the wedding to be elegant. Jessica stared at him in disbelief. Elegant? She pointed toward the giant screen where Sarah's final words still lingered in everyone's minds. That man gave up his entire life for his daughter. And you were worried about a 20-year-old suit. No one defended Richard. Not even his own wife. For the first time in years, the powerful businessman had no response. Emily reached the front gate where an elderly security guard stood. She was breathless. The man who just left. My father. Did you see which way he went? The guard nodded. He walked toward the bus stop. Emily looked at the empty street. Did he get on a bus? I don't know. He never looked back. Those words pierced her heart. He never looked back. Because she had given him no reason to. She kept running. Her wedding dress dragged through puddles. Cars slowed as drivers stared at the crying bride racing down the sidewalk. Finally, she reached the city bus stop. Empty. She collapsed onto the bench. It was cold. Then she noticed something lying beside her. A folded napkin. The old bus driver waiting nearby recognized it immediately. The gentleman in the blue suit left that. Emily grabbed it with trembling hands. Inside was a single handwritten sentence. Your mother would have been so proud of you today. Be happy, sweetheart. Love, Dad. There wasn't a single word about what had happened. No blame, no anger, no complaint. Just love. Emily pressed the note against her chest and sobbed until she could barely breathe. 20 minutes earlier, Daniel sat quietly in the back of bus route 17. He watched Boston disappear through the window. The harbor, the hotels, the wedding venue, his daughter's new life. An elderly woman sitting across from him smiled kindly. Big day? Daniel looked down at his old suit. My daughter's wedding. Congratulations. He smiled. Thank you. Did you enjoy it? He looked out the window again. It was beautiful. The woman noticed the tears in his eyes. She didn't ask another question. Some pain speaks loudly enough without words. The bus stopped near South Boston. Daniel got off and walked 3 blocks to a modest apartment building. Apartment 4B. Home. His neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, was watering flowers outside. She smiled. Daniel, you're back already? I thought the wedding would last all night. He forced a smile. Plans changed. She noticed his expression immediately. Everything all right? He nodded. Just tired. She had known Daniel for 6 years. She knew he was lying. But she also knew he never talked about his pain until he was ready. She simply squeezed his shoulder. If you need anything, I'm downstairs. Daniel smiled gratefully. Thank you. He entered the apartment. Silence greeted him. The same silence that had lived there since Sarah died. He carefully removed his jacket and hung it beside the door. Then he opened the refrigerator. Half a loaf of bread. Milk. A few eggs. Enough. He made himself a simple sandwich. Not because he was hungry, because he didn't know what else to do. As he sat at the small kitchen table, his eyes drifted toward the bookshelf. There sat dozens of photo albums. He pulled one down. The first page showed Emily at age 5, missing 2 front teeth, holding a homemade Father's Day card. The card read, My daddy is my best friend. Daniel smiled through fresh tears. Those were good days. Across town, the wedding reception had turned into something completely different. No one wanted to dance. No one wanted champagne. Guests gathered in small groups, quietly talking about the video. An older judge shook Ethan's hand. I've attended hundreds of weddings. I've never seen anything like today. Another guest added. Your father-in-law sounds like an extraordinary man. Ethan lowered his eyes. He is. Where is he? I don't know. The words tasted bitter. Because he should have known. Richard Caldwell sat alone at one of the reception tables. His untouched glass of champagne reflected the ballroom lights. For the first time in decades, he remembered his own father, Frank Caldwell, a steel worker, a man who had arrived in America with nothing but a suitcase. Richard had spent years trying to forget those humble beginnings. Somewhere along the way, he had started believing money erased where people came from. Now Sarah's video echoed inside his mind. Don't measure people by the suits they wear. Richard quietly removed his expensive cufflinks. For the first time in years, they felt heavy. Emily returned to the ballroom nearly an hour later. Her dress was stained, her makeup ruined, her feet bleeding. Every guest turned toward her. She walked straight to Ethan. "I'm sorry." Ethan nodded sadly. "So am I." She looked around the room. "My father spent his whole life protecting me. And today, I couldn't even protect his dignity." Nobody spoke. Emily took a deep breath. "The wedding is postponed." Gasps filled the room. She continued. "I'm not marrying anyone today. Not until I find my father." She gently removed her veil, then her bouquet, then her bridal gloves. She laid them all on the head table. "My father walked into this building as my guest. I made him leave like a stranger. I won't celebrate another second until I bring him home." Without waiting for anyone's reaction, Emily walked out once more. This time, not as a bride, but as a daughter desperate for one more chance. She had no idea that Daniel wasn't the only one keeping a secret. Back in his apartment, hidden inside an old wooden toolbox beneath his bed, was a sealed envelope addressed to Emily. On the front, in Daniel's careful handwriting, were 6 heartbreaking words. "Open only if I'm gone forever." 3 days passed. 3 long days. Daniel Brooks never answered his phone. Emily called him 84 times. Every call went to voicemail. She left messages until her voice became hoarse. "Dad, please. I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, just let me know you're okay." Silence. No reply. The wedding photos flooded social media. But none of them showed the ceremony. Because there hadn't been one. Instead, newspapers carried a different headline. "Bride postpones wedding after emotional family revelation." The video had spread across the internet. Millions of people watched Sarah Brooks speak about the sacrifices Daniel had made. Strangers called him a hero, a father of the year, an example of unconditional love. The irony wasn't lost on Emily. The whole country admired the man she had sent away. Jessica refused to let Emily search alone. Every morning they drove across Boston. They visited every place Daniel loved: the public library, the small diner where he always ordered black coffee, the harbor bench where he and Sarah watched sunsets, the hardware store where he'd worked part-time after retiring. Everyone asked the same question: "Where's Daniel?" Emily could barely answer. "I don't know." On the 4th day, they stopped outside Daniel's apartment building. Mrs. Henderson was watering her flowers again. She smiled when she saw Emily. "Oh, honey." Without another word, Emily hugged the elderly woman and burst into tears. "I'm looking for my dad." Mrs. Henderson's smile faded. "I haven't seen him since the wedding." Emily's heart sank. "He isn't here?" Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "He packed one small duffel bag. He told me he needed some quiet. He didn't say where he was going." Emily closed her eyes. "He left because of me." Mrs. Henderson gently held her hands. "No. He left because he didn't want you to carry his pain. That's the kind of man your father is." Mrs. Henderson reached into her pocket. "He asked me to give you this, if you ever came." It was a small brass key. Emily stared at it. "Apartment 4B. He said you should go inside." Emily unlocked the apartment door. The smell hit her first. Fresh coffee. Old books. Pine furniture polish. It smelled exactly like childhood. Nothing had changed. His reading glasses still rested beside his favorite chair. The radio sat on the kitchen counter. A crossword puzzle remained unfinished on the table. It felt as though Daniel had simply stepped outside for a moment. Jessica quietly looked around. "I've never been here." Emily smiled sadly. "You would have loved him." "I already do." She wandered through the apartment slowly. Every shelf held memories. Her kindergarten drawings, her soccer trophies, Old birthday cards she thought had been thrown away years ago. Nothing she had ever made had been discarded. Her father had kept everything. Jessica picked up a faded macaroni art frame. "You made this?" Emily laughed through tears. "I was 7. The crooked letters read, 'Best Dad Ever.'" Emily could barely stand. Then she noticed something unusual. The bedroom was spotless, except beneath the bed. An old wooden toolbox sat pushed against the wall. She frowned. "My dad never kept tools in his bedroom." She pulled it out. Inside were neatly organized hammers, screwdrivers, measuring tapes. And beneath them, a large sealed envelope. On the front, written in Daniel's familiar handwriting, "Open only if I'm gone forever." Emily froze. "No," Jessica whispered. Maybe he just wanted to be prepared. Emily's hands shook so violently she could hardly hold the envelope. "I can't." Jessica nodded. "Then don't." Emily stared at it for nearly a minute. Finally, she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Several pages. She recognized every curve of his handwriting instantly. The first line shattered her. "If you're reading this, sweetheart, it means I wasn't lucky enough to say goodbye." Tears blurred her vision. She continued. "Please don't blame yourself for anything. Life is far too short to carry guilt longer than love." Emily covered her mouth. How could he still be protecting her? After everything she'd done? She kept reading. "I want you to know a few things I never found the courage to say. First, I was never disappointed in you. Not once. Not when you came home with bad grades. Not when you slammed doors as a teenager. Not even on the day you asked me to leave your wedding." Emily collapsed onto the bedroom floor. Jessica knelt beside her, silently crying. The letter continued. "People make mistakes, especially when they're afraid of losing the life they've worked so hard to build. I know you weren't ashamed of me. You were afraid the people around you would be. Those are 2 different kinds of pain," Emily whispered. "No, I was ashamed." The truth finally escaped her lips. She kept reading. "There's something I never told you. 2 years ago, doctors found another problem with my heart." Emily stopped breathing. "Another problem?" "They recommended surgery. The insurance wouldn't cover all of it. It would have cost nearly $90,000. Jessica looked horrified. "He never told you?" Emily slowly shook her head. "No." The next sentence hurt even more. "You had just started your own law firm. You were finally happy. I couldn't ask you to give up your dreams. So I decided to live with it." Emily screamed. "Dad!" Her voice echoed through the apartment. There was one final page, folded separately. At the top was written, "One last favor." Emily unfolded it carefully. "If I ever disappear, please don't waste your life looking for me. Spend that time loving people. Forgive quickly. Call your friends. Visit lonely neighbors. Be the woman your mother believed you already were. That would be the greatest thank you you could ever give me." At the bottom, one final sentence. "And sweetheart, I never stopped being proud of you. Love forever. Dad." Emily held the letter against her heart. For several minutes, neither woman spoke. Finally, Jessica noticed something tucked behind the last page. A folded medical report. Emily opened it. Her blood ran cold. Diagnosis: advanced congestive heart failure. Recommended treatment: immediate surgery. Recommended date: 3 weeks before the wedding. Jessica whispered. "Oh my God!" Emily stared at the report in disbelief. Her father hadn't left because she embarrassed him. He had been dying, and still spent his last strength trying to protect her happiness. Emily wiped away her tears. For the first time in days, her sadness turned into determination. She stood up. "No." Jessica looked at her. "He isn't gone. I can feel it. I'm going to find him, no matter how long it takes." She folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her purse. Then she looked around the apartment one last time. Above Daniel's old armchair hung a small framed photograph. It showed 6-year-old Emily sitting on his shoulders during a 4th of July parade. On the back of the frame, hidden from view, was a handwritten note. "Every road I've ever taken has always led back to my little girl. Emily smiled through tears. Then I'll follow every road until it leads me back to you. She had no idea that hundreds of miles away, in a quiet lakeside cabin in northern Maine, Daniel Brooks had just collapsed while chopping firewood, and there was no one there to hear him fall. The axe slipped from Daniel's hands. It struck the ground with a dull thud. He reached for his chest. A sharp pain shot through his left arm. His knees buckled. Within seconds, he collapsed onto the grass beside a pile of freshly cut firewood. Above him, the tall pine trees swayed gently in the summer breeze. For a strange moment, everything became quiet. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Not yet. Please. I just want to see her smile one more time." Then everything went dark. The small cabin belonged to Daniel's oldest friend, Frank Miller. The two men had worked construction together for nearly 30 years. Frank had retired to northern Maine after losing his wife. When Daniel called a week earlier and asked, "Can I borrow the cabin for a little while?" Frank hadn't asked questions. He simply handed him the keys. Now, as Frank drove up the gravel road carrying groceries, he spotted Daniel lying motionless near the woodshed. "Daniel!" The grocery bags hit the ground. Frank rushed over and checked for a pulse. Weak. Very weak. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911. "Please hurry! My friend isn't breathing right. I think he's having a heart attack." 200 miles away in Boston, Emily sat in Daniel's apartment surrounded by old photo albums. She refused to leave. She felt closer to him there. Jessica walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You need to eat something." Emily shook her head. "I can't." "You haven't slept." "I don't deserve sleep." Jessica sat beside her. "Your father wouldn't want this." Emily stared at the faded family photos. "That's the problem. He always wanted what was best for me, and I forgot to want what was best for him." Her phone suddenly rang. Unknown number. She answered immediately. "Hello?" A calm voice spoke. "Is this Emily Brooks?" "Yes." "My name is Frank Miller." Silence. "I've been your father's friend for 30 years. Emily stood up so quickly the chair fell backward. "My dad? Is he okay?" Frank hesitated. The pause told her everything. "He collapsed this afternoon." Emily's face turned white. "What?" "He's alive. But he's being airlifted to Maine Medical Center." Emily couldn't breathe. "What happened?" "The doctors think it was his heart." Her knees gave out. Jessica caught her before she hit the floor. Frank continued softly. "He never wanted to worry you. But I think it's time you came." 4 hours later, Emily's SUV raced north through the darkness. Jessica drove while Emily clutched her father's letter. She read it over and over. Every sentence felt heavier than before. Rain pounded against the windshield. No one spoke. Finally, Jessica broke the silence. "What will you say if he wakes up?" Emily stared out the window. "I don't know. Sorry doesn't seem big enough." Meanwhile, at Maine Medical Center, doctors rushed Daniel into emergency surgery. Outside the operating room, Frank sat alone. His weathered hands trembled. A young nurse approached. "Are you family?" Frank smiled sadly. "No, but after 40 years, he might as well be my brother." The nurse nodded. "He's lucky you found him." Frank looked toward the operating room doors. "No, I think his daughter is the lucky one." 5 hours later, Emily burst through the hospital, entrance still wearing the same sneakers she'd thrown on after leaving Boston. Her wedding ring wasn't on her finger. Her makeup had long since washed away. Only exhaustion remained. She rushed to the reception desk. "Daniel Brooks, the heart patient." The nurse checked the computer. "Family? I'm his daughter." The nurse's expression softened. "He's still in surgery." Emily closed her eyes. "I'm too late." "No." The nurse gently touched her shoulder. "You're here. Sometimes that's enough." Frank stood when he saw her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he walked over. "You've grown up." Emily looked confused. "You know me?" Frank smiled. "I held you the day you were born." She immediately hugged him. "I'm sorry." Frank frowned. "For what?" "For everything." He gently pulled away. "Then promise me something." "Anything. If Daniel wakes up, don't waste the first minute apologizing." Emily looked surprised. What? Frank nodded toward the operating room. Spend it loving him. The apologies can wait. Hours crawled by. Midnight. 1 o'clock. 2. At nearly 3 in the morning. The surgeon finally walked into the waiting room. Everyone stood. Family of Daniel Brooks? Emily stepped forward. I'm his daughter. The surgeon removed his surgical cap. The surgery was successful. Emily burst into tears of relief. But her heart sank again. There were complications. He lost a great deal of strength before arriving. The next 24 hours are critical. When can I see him? The doctor smiled gently. For a few minutes. Daniel's hospital room was quiet. Machines beeped steadily. His face looked pale. Older. Smaller somehow. Emily had never seen her father looking fragile. To her, he had always seemed indestructible. She slowly walked to his bedside. For a long moment, she simply watched him breathe. Then she took his rough hand into hers. Those same hands had built houses, fixed bicycles, packed school lunches, held her after nightmares. Hands she'd once been embarrassed to show her wealthy friends because they were scarred from years of hard labor. Now, they looked beautiful. Her tears fell onto his fingers. Dad, I'm here. His eyelids fluttered. Very slowly. He opened his eyes. It took him a moment to focus. Then, he recognized her. A weak smile appeared. Emily. His voice was barely a whisper. You came. Emily broke down completely. She fell to her knees beside the bed. I'm so sorry. I was selfish. I was cruel. I cared more about strangers than the man who gave me everything. I don't deserve another chance. Daniel squeezed her hand with surprising strength. Sweetheart. She looked up. I forgave you, before you even asked. Emily cried even harder. How? He smiled faintly. Because that's what fathers do. She rested her forehead against his hand. I thought success meant having the perfect life. Daniel gently shook his head. No, it means never forgetting who helped you build it. Emily nodded through tears. I promise. I'll never forget again. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then his eyes drifted toward the window. The first rays of sunrise were beginning to light the sky. He whispered, Your mother would have loved this sunrise. Emily smiled sadly. Tell me about her. Daniel chuckled softly. Oh, I've got a lifetime of stories. Outside the hospital room, Frank quietly wiped away tears. For the first time since the wedding, he believed everything might still be okay. But down the hallway, a man in an expensive tailored suit had just stepped out of the elevator. It was Richard Caldwell, and the folder he carried in his hands contained a decision that would change Daniel and Emily's lives forever. The morning sun filled Daniel's hospital room with a warm golden light. For the first time in weeks, Emily wasn't thinking about the wedding. She wasn't thinking about embarrassment, or money, or social status. She was simply grateful. Grateful that her father was still breathing. She sat beside his bed, gently holding his hand. Daniel smiled. You've been awake all night. Emily laughed softly. So have you. I've had 30 years to sleep. She shook her head. You still make jokes. Daniel winked. They're free. A gentle knock came at the door. Richard Caldwell stepped inside. His perfectly tailored suit looked as flawless as ever. But his face didn't. He looked older. Tired. Ashamed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Richard walked toward Daniel's bed. Then, to Emily's complete surprise, he removed his expensive jacket and slowly lowered himself to one knee. I'm sorry. The room fell silent. Daniel looked stunned. Richard's voice trembled. I spent my entire life believing success was measured by wealth. Then I watched Sarah's video, and I realized I've never been half the man you are. Daniel gently shook his head. Please stand. Richard didn't move. No, not until you hear me. He opened the leather folder he had been carrying. Inside were several documents. I've already spoken to the hospital. He slid the papers onto the bedside table. Every medical bill, every surgery, every rehabilitation expense. I'm paying all of it. Emily stared at him. You don't have to. I know, Richard interrupted. I'm doing it because I should. Daniel looked uncomfortable. I can't accept charity. Richard smiled sadly. This isn't charity. It's the smallest apology I can offer. Daniel remained silent. Richard continued. I judged a man by his clothes. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. After a long pause, Daniel finally nodded. Then, I accept. But only if you promise me something. Richard frowned. Anything. You'll never make another person feel small because they have less than you. Richard's eyes filled with tears. I promise. The two men shook hands. It wasn't just forgiveness. It was the beginning of respect. Later that afternoon, Ethan quietly entered the room. He looked nothing like the confident groom from the wedding day. His shoulders were slumped. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. He walked straight to Daniel. I failed you. Daniel smiled gently. No, I did. I should have defended you. I should have told everyone that I was proud to have you at my wedding. Daniel reached out and squeezed his shoulder. You've learned. That's what matters. Ethan looked at Emily. I don't expect you to forgive me. Emily sighed. I have to forgive. My father already has. She smiled faintly. But trust. Trust takes time. Ethan nodded. I'll earn it. Over the next several days, Daniel slowly grew stronger. The nurses adored him. He remembered every name. He thanked everyone. He even joked with the cleaning staff. One afternoon, a young nurse asked, Mr. Brooks, were you really homeless so your daughter could go to law school? Daniel chuckled. I wasn't homeless. I just had a truck with a very uncomfortable mattress. The nurse laughed through tears. You make everything sound easy. Daniel smiled. It wasn't, but she was worth it. Emily stood outside the room. She heard every word and cried all over again. News of Daniel's story continued spreading across America. Letters arrived by the hundreds. Teachers, veterans, single parents, college students. Each one thanked him for reminding them what unconditional love looked like. One envelope stood out. It was from a 10-year-old boy in Ohio. Inside was $5 and a handwritten note. Dear Mr. Brooks, my mom says heroes don't wear capes. Please use this money to buy yourself some ice cream. Love, Tyler. Daniel laughed until tears rolled down his cheeks. Now that's a fortune. A week later, the doctor smiled as he reviewed Daniel's latest test results. I think someone wants to go home. Daniel grinned. I've been ready since yesterday. Emily laughed. I already packed your bag. As they walked toward the hospital exit together, photographers waited outside. Reporters called Daniel's name. Mr. Brooks, can we ask you a question? How do you feel about becoming an internet hero? Daniel smiled politely. I'm not a hero. I'm just a dad. Another reporter shouted. What do you think your greatest achievement is? Daniel looked toward Emily. She slipped her arm through his. He smiled. Her. Every camera captured the moment. By that evening, the photograph appeared on television across the country. A father in an old blue jacket, a daughter holding his arm, neither one looking at the cameras, only at each other. 2 weeks later, Emily returned to the harbor wedding venue. This time, there were no flowers, no orchestra, no guests, only silence. She stood in the exact spot where she had asked her father to leave. Tears filled her eyes. I'm sorry. A familiar voice answered behind her. I know. She turned. Daniel stood there smiling. Healthier, still wearing his old navy blue suit. Emily ran into his arms. He hugged her tightly. You know, I never liked this place anyway. She laughed through tears. Me neither. Then she reached into her purse. She pulled out 2 pieces of paper. One was the wedding contract. The other, a new invitation. Daniel looked confused. What is this? Emily smiled. Our real wedding. He opened the invitation. It read, Location, Maple Street Community Church. The little church where Daniel and Sarah had married 35 years earlier. Dress code? Come exactly as you are. Daniel couldn't speak. Emily continued. No designer guest list. No $1 million decorations. No pretending. Just family and the people who love us. Daniel hugged her again. Your mother would have been smiling. Emily looked toward the sky. I hope she still is. But as father and daughter stood together overlooking Boston Harbor, neither of them noticed a woman quietly watching from across the street. She held an old photo in trembling hands. When she whispered Daniel's name, her voice cracked with emotion, because she carried a secret that had been buried for more than 30 years. A secret about Sarah. That would change everything they believed about their family. The woman stood across the street, clutching an old photograph so tightly that its edges had begun to bend. Her name was Margaret Evans. She was 71 years old. For more than 3 decades, she had carried a secret she promised never to reveal. But after watching Daniel Brooks' story on the news, she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Daniel? Her quiet voice carried across the sidewalk. Daniel turned. For a moment, he stared at her without recognition. Then his eyes widened. Margaret. Emily looked from one to the other. You know each other? Margaret smiled sadly. I knew your mother. Daniel took a slow step forward. I haven't seen you since Sarah's funeral. Margaret nodded. I know. And I'm sorry I disappeared. She held up the faded photograph. I've been waiting for the right time. The 3 of them sat on a nearby park bench overlooking the harbor. Margaret carefully placed the photograph in Daniel's hands. It showed 3 young women laughing outside a small nursing school. One of them was Sarah. The other 2 were Margaret. And Sarah's younger sister, Rebecca. Emily frowned. My mother had a sister? Daniel looked just as surprised. No, Sarah told me she was an only child. Margaret lowered her eyes. She wasn't. 35 years earlier, Sarah and Rebecca had been inseparable. Rebecca was adventurous, fearless, always chasing dreams. But at 19, she left home after a bitter argument with their parents. She wanted to travel the world. They wanted her to stay. Pride kept everyone apart. Months became years. Letters stopped coming. Eventually, everyone assumed Rebecca had built a new life somewhere else. Sarah never stopped missing her. Margaret reached into her purse. She removed a sealed envelope. The week before Sarah died, she gave me this. Daniel looked confused. Why not give it to me then? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Because she made me promise. She said, only give this to Daniel after Emily learns what real love looks like. Daniel's hands began to tremble. He slowly opened the envelope. Inside was another letter. Sarah's handwriting. He hadn't seen it in 14 years. My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, then our little girl finally understands. Daniel stopped reading. His vision blurred with tears. Emily gently squeezed his shoulder. He continued. First, thank you. Thank you for loving our daughter enough for both of us. I always knew you would. Now I need to tell you something I never had the courage to say. Rebecca found me. Daniel looked up in shock. What? Margaret nodded. Keep reading. 6 months before I got sick. My sister came home. She was dying. Cancer. Just like me. Emily covered her mouth. Sarah had never told anyone. She asked me not to tell the family. She wanted to spend her final months quietly. She died 3 weeks before I did. Daniel couldn't believe it. Sarah had carried that pain alone. The letter continued. Before Rebecca passed away, she made one request. She left everything she owned to Emily. Daniel frowned. Everything? Margaret nodded. There was almost nothing. The next sentence explained why. It wasn't money. It was hope. Margaret reached into her bag again. This time, she removed a small leather journal. This belonged to Rebecca. Emily opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten travel stories, photographs, postcards, sketches from around the world. On the final page, Rebecca had written, to my niece Emily, if you're reading this, it means your mother believed you'd become someone who values people more than possessions. Never let success become more important than kindness. Emily smiled through tears. She sounds like Mom. Margaret laughed softly. They were very much alike. Daniel looked out over the harbor. So all these years, Sarah carried her sister's secret. Margaret nodded. She thought the truth would only bring more pain while everyone was grieving. Emily closed the journal. I think Mom knew I wasn't ready to understand any of this. Daniel smiled proudly. But you are now. A month later, the new wedding day finally arrived. Not at a luxury hotel, not in a grand ballroom, at the little white church on Maple Street, exactly where Daniel and Sarah had married. The decorations were simple. Wildflowers picked by neighborhood children, homemade pies instead of a five-star dessert table, friends, neighbors, construction workers, teachers, nurses. People from every walk of life sat together in the same wooden pews. No VIP section, no reserved seats, just family. As the ceremony began, Emily didn't walk down the aisle alone. She held tightly onto her father's arm. Halfway down the aisle, she stopped, turned toward every guest, and smiled. I have something to say. The church became silent. She faced Daniel. When I was little, I thought my father was the strongest man in the world. Then I grew up and forgot why. Tears filled every corner of the room. Emily continued. I once asked him to leave my wedding because I thought he didn't belong. She took a deep breath. I was wrong. She smiled at Daniel. The truth is, he was the only reason I belonged anywhere. Daniel couldn't hold back his tears. Neither could anyone else. Emily wrapped her arms around him. This wedding doesn't begin until the first man I ever loved walks me the rest of the way. The entire church stood and applauded. Even Ethan wiped tears from his eyes. Slowly, father and daughter walked the remaining steps together. For the first time in years, neither one was carrying shame, only love. As Daniel placed Emily's hand into Ethan's, he whispered, Take care of her. Ethan smiled. I will. Then he added quietly, And she'll never have to choose between me and you again. Daniel nodded. That's all I ever wanted. The ceremony began, but before it ended, the pastor smiled at the guests. I've performed weddings for 42 years. I've never witnessed a greater example of forgiveness. Everyone believed the story was finally complete. They were wrong. Because after the reception, Daniel was about to reveal one last surprise. A gift he had been quietly preparing for Emily for nearly 10 years. The little church echoed with laughter. Children ran between the picnic tables outside. Neighbors served homemade apple pie. Someone played old country songs on a guitar. There were no crystal chandeliers, no million-dollar decorations, no luxury cars lined up outside. And somehow, it was the most beautiful wedding anyone there had ever attended. Daniel sat quietly beneath a large oak tree, watching Emily laugh with Ethan. For the first time in years, his heart felt peaceful. As the reception began to wind down, Daniel slowly stood. He gently tapped a spoon against his glass. I have one last wedding gift. The guests fell silent. Emily smiled. Dad? You've already given me everything. Daniel chuckled. I thought that too. But then I remembered something. He reached into the inside pocket of his old navy blue suit. Everyone expected another letter. Instead, he pulled out a small brass key. Emily frowned. What does it open? Daniel smiled. A surprise. An hour later, the entire wedding party followed. Daniel to a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Boston. He stopped in front of a modest 2-story brick house. White shutters, a maple tree in the front yard, a wide porch with an old wooden swing. Emily looked confused. Whose house is this? Daniel placed the key in her hand. It's yours. Silence. Emily stared at him. What? Daniel nodded. I bought it. You bought a house? 10 years ago. Emily couldn't speak. You told me you were renting an apartment. Daniel smiled sheepishly. I was. But every extra dollar I earned, I put toward this place. Emily's eyes filled with tears. But why? Daniel looked at the house. Because every child deserves a home. I wanted you to have one. Richard Caldwell stepped forward in disbelief. You never said anything. Daniel shrugged. I didn't buy it for recognition. I bought it for my daughter. Emily's hands trembled. You've been paying for this All these years? Daniel nodded. One mortgage payment at a time, Jessica whispered. Oh my God! Daniel unlocked the front door. Inside, the house was fully furnished. Not with expensive furniture, but with love. A cozy living room. A bookshelf already filled with Emily's favorite novels from childhood. The old rocking chair Sarah had loved. Family photographs carefully framed on every wall. In one bedroom, a handmade quilt stitched together from pieces of Emily's old baby clothes. Emily burst into tears. You kept everything. Daniel smiled. Every memory. Then Daniel walked into the kitchen. He opened one final drawer. Inside rested a small wooden box. Emily recognized it instantly. It was the same box that had held Sarah's recipes. Daniel handed it to her. Your mom wanted you to have this. Inside, there were dozens of handwritten recipe cards. Apple pie, chicken soup, Sunday pancakes. On the very bottom, one final note. Written by Sarah. A house becomes a home when people choose each other every single day. Promise me you'll always choose love first. Emily pressed the note against her heart. I promise. Daniel quietly walked onto the back porch. The evening sun painted the sky shades of orange and pink. Emily joined him. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. Dad? Can I ask you something? Always. After everything. After the wedding. Were you ever angry with me? Daniel smiled. For about 5 minutes. Emily laughed through tears. Only 5? He nodded. Then I remembered the little girl who used to wait by the window every evening, just to watch her daddy come home from work. I knew she was still inside you. You'd just gotten lost for a while. Emily wrapped her arms around him. Thank you for never giving up on me. Daniel hugged her tightly. I couldn't. I'm your father. Months passed. Daniel recovered completely. Emily and Ethan moved into the little brick house. Every Sunday, they invited neighbors, friends, and family for dinner. No one cared how much money anyone had. Everyone brought something to share. Laughter filled the room Sarah had dreamed about. Richard Caldwell kept his promise. He established a scholarship for the children of construction workers, janitors, nurses, and single parents. He named it the Daniel Brooks Family Scholarship. When reporters asked him why, he answered simply, because the greatest builders don't always build buildings. Sometimes they build people. One spring afternoon, Emily stood before hundreds of graduates at Boston Law School. She had been invited to deliver the commencement speech. She looked out at the sea of young faces and smiled. Then she told them a story. Not about winning cases, not about success, not about money. She told them about a man with rough hands, an old blue suit, and a heart bigger than any fortune. She ended with these words. My father once believed he had nothing to leave me. He was wrong. He gave me courage. He gave me kindness. He taught me that real wealth isn't measured by what you keep. It's measured by what you're willing to give away. The audience rose to its feet. Among them, Daniel sat in the front row, wearing the same old navy blue suit. This time, no one saw an old suit. They saw the richest man in the room. Epilogue. Years later, when Daniel Brooks passed away peacefully at the age of 86, the little church on Maple Street could not hold everyone who came to honor him. Construction workers stood beside judges. Teachers stood beside CEOs. Single mothers stood beside millionaires. Every person carried a single white rose. At the front of the church, Emily placed her father's worn work gloves beside his photograph. She smiled through her tears. My father thought he was leaving me an inheritance. He did. It just wasn't money. It was the way he loved. And that's the one treasure no one can ever steal. As the church bells rang across the neighborhood, everyone understood the truth Daniel Brooks had spent a lifetime proving. The greatest inheritance a parent can leave isn't wealth. It's a heart that teaches others how to love.